Section 31 of the Interpretation of Dreams. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Malone. The Interpretation of Dreams by Sigmund Freud. Translated by A. Brill. Section 31. Representation in Dreams by Symbols. Some further typical dreams. Part 1. The analysis of the last biographical dream shows that I recognized the symbolism in dreams from the very onset. But it was only little by little that I arrived at a full appreciation of its extent and significance, as the result of increasing experience, and under the influence of the works of W. Steckel, concerning which I may here fittingly say something. This author, who has perhaps injured psychoanalysis as much as he has benefited it, produced a large number of novel symbolic translations, to which no credence was given at first, but most of which were later confirmed and had to be accepted. Steckel's services are in no way belittled by the remark that the skeptical reserve with which these symbols were received was not unjustified, for the examples upon which he based his interpretations were often unconvincing, and moreover, he employed a method which must be rejected as scientifically unreliable. Steckel found his symbolic meanings by way of intuition, by virtue of his individual faculty of immediately understanding the symbols. But such an art cannot be generally assumed. Its efficiency is immune from criticism, and its results have therefore no claim to credibility. It is as though one were to base one's diagnosis of infectious diseases on the olfactory impressions received beside the sickbed, although, of course, there have been clinicians to whom the sense of smell, atrophied in most people, has been of greater service than to others, and who really have been able to diagnose a case of abdominal typhus by their sense of smell. The progressive experience of psychoanalysis has enabled us to discover patients who have displayed, in a surprising degree, this immediate understanding of dream symbolism. Many of these patients suffered from dementia praecox, so that for a time there was an inclination to suspect that all dreamers with such an understanding of symbols were suffering from that disorder. But this did not prove to be the case. It is simply a question of a personal gift or idiosyncrasy without perceptible pathological significance. When one has familiarized oneself with the extensive employment of symbolism for the representation of sexual material in dreams, one naturally asks oneself whether many of these symbols have not a permanently established meaning, like the signs in shorthand. And one even thinks of attempting to compile a new dream book on the lines of the cipher method. In this connection, it should be noted that symbolism does not appertain especially to dreams, but rather to the unconscious imagination, and particularly to that of the people, and it is to be found in a more developed condition in folklore, myths, legends, idiomatic phrases, proverbs, and the current witticisms of a person than in dreams. We should have, therefore, to go far beyond the province of dream interpretation in order to fully investigate the meaning of symbolism, and to discuss the numerous problems, for the most part still unsolved, which are associated with the concept of the symbol. We shall here confine ourselves to saying that representation by a symbol comes under the heading of the indirect representations, but that we are warned by all sorts of signs against indiscriminately classing symbolic representation with the other modes of indirect representation before we have clearly conceived its distinguishing characteristics. In a number of cases, the common quality shared by the symbol and the thing which it represents is obvious. In others, it is concealed. In these latter cases, the choice of the symbol appears to be enigmatic, and these are the very cases that must be able to elucidate the ultimate meaning of the symbolic relation. They point to the fact that it is of a generic nature. What is today symbolically connected was probably united, in primitive times, by conceptual and linguistic identity. The symbolic relationship seems to be a residue and reminder of a former identity. It may also be noted that in many cases the symbolic identity extends beyond the linguistic identity, as had already been asserted by Schubert, 1814. Dreams employ this symbolism to give a distinguished representation to their latent thoughts. Among the symbols thus employed, there are, of course, many which constantly, or all but constantly, mean the same thing. But we must bear in mind the curious plasticity of psychic material. Often enough, a symbol in the dream content may have to be interpreted not symbolically, but in accordance with its proper meaning. At other times, the dreamer, having to deal with special memory material, may take the law into his own hands and employ anything whatever as a sexual symbol, though it is not generally so employed. Wherever he has the choice of several symbols for the representation of a dream content, he will decide in favor of that symbol which is, in addition, objectively related to his other thought material. That is to say, he will employ an individual motivation besides the typically valid one. Although since Sharmer's time the more recent investigations of dream problems have definitely established the existence of a dream symbolism, even Havelock Ellis acknowledges that our dreams are indubitably full of symbols, it must yet be admitted that the existence of symbols in dreams has not only facilitated dream interpretation, but has also made it more difficult. The technique of interpretation, in accordance with the dreamer's free associations, more often than otherwise, leaves us in the lurch as far as the symbolic elements of the dream content are concerned. A return to the arbitrariness of dream interpretation as it was practiced in antiquity and is seemingly revived by Stekel's wild interpretations is contrary to scientific method. Consequently, those elements in the dream content which are to be symbolically regarded compel us to employ a combined technique, which on the one hand is based on the dreamer's associations, while on the other hand the missing portions have to be supplied by the interpreter's understanding of the symbols. Critical circumspection in the solution of the symbols must coincide with careful study of the symbols in especially transparent examples of dreams, in order to silence the reproach of arbitrariness in dream interpretation. The uncertainties which still adhere to our function as dream interpreters are due partly to our imperfect knowledge, which, however, can be progressively increased, and partly to certain peculiarities of the dream symbols themselves. These often possess many and varied meanings, so that, as in Chinese script, only the context can furnish the correct meaning. This multiple significance of the symbol is allied to the dreamer's faculty of admitting over-interpretations, of representing in the same content various wish impulses and thought formations, often of a widely divergent character. After these limitations and reservations, I will proceed. The emperor and the empress, king and queen, in most cases really represent the dreamer's parents. The dreamer himself or herself is the prince or princess, but the high authority conceded to the emperor is also conceded to great men, so that in some dreams, for example, Goethe appears as a father symbol, Hitchman. All elongated objects, sticks, tree trunks, umbrellas, on account of the opening, which might be likened to an erection, all sharp and elongated weapons, knives, daggers, and pikes, represent the male member. A frequent but not very intelligible symbol for the same is a nail file, a reference to rubbing and scraping. Small boxes, chests, cupboards, and ovens correspond to the female organ, also cavities, ships, and all kinds of vessels. A room in a dream generally represents a woman. The description of its various entrances and exits is scarcely calculated to make us doubt this interpretation. The interest as to whether the room is open or locked will be readily understood in this connection. There is no need to be explicit as to the sort of key that will unlock the room. The symbolism of lock and key has been gracefully, if broadly employed, by Uhland in his Song of the Graf Eberstein. The dream of walking through a suite of rooms signifies a brothel or a harem, but as H. Sachs has shown by an admirable example, it is also employed to represent marriage, contrast. An interesting relation to the sexual investigations of childhood emerges when the dreamer dreams of two rooms which were previously one, or finds that a familiar room in a house of which he dreams has been divided into two, or the reverse. In childhood, the female genitals and anus, the behind, are conceived as a single opening according to the infantile cloaca theory, and only later is it discovered that this region of the body contains two separate cavities and openings. Steep inclines, ladders, and stairs, and going up or down them are symbolic representations of the sexual act. Smooth walls over which one climbs, facades of houses across which one lets oneself down, often with a sense of great anxiety, correspond to erect human bodies, and probably repeat in our dreams childish memories of climbing up parents or nurses. Smooth walls are men. In anxiety dreams, one often holds firmly to projections on houses. Tables, whether bare or covered, and boards are women, perhaps by virtue of contrast, since they have no protruding contours. Wood, generally speaking, seems, in accordance with its linguistic relations, to represent feminine matter, materie. The name of the island Madeira means wood in Portuguese. Since bed and board, mensa et thorus, constitute marriage, in dreams the latter is often substituted for the former, and as far as practicable, the sexual representation complex is transposed to the eating complex. Of articles of dress, a woman's hat may very often be interpreted with certainty as the male genitals. In the dreams of men, one often finds the necktie as a symbol for the penis. This is not only because neckties hang down in front of the body and are characteristic of men, but also because one can select them at pleasure, a freedom which nature prohibits as regards the original of the symbol. Persons who make use of this symbol in dreams are very extravagant in the matter of ties, and possess whole collections of them. All complicated machines and appliances are very probably the genitals, as a rule the male genitals, in the description of which the symbolism of dreams is as indefatigable as human wit. It is quite unmistakable that all weapons and tools are used as symbols for the male organ, e.g., plowshare, hammer, gun, revolver, dagger, sword, etc. Again, many of the landscapes seen in dreams, especially those that contain bridges or wooded mountains, may be readily recognized as descriptions of the genitals. Markinowski collected a series of examples in which the dreamer explained his dream by means of drawings, in order to represent the landscapes and places appearing in it. These drawings clearly showed the distinction between the manifest and the latent meaning of the dream, whereas naively regarded they seemed to represent plans, maps, and so forth. Closer investigation showed that they were representations of the human body, of the genitals, etc., and only after conceiving them thus could the dream be understood. Finally, where one finds incomprehensible neologisms, one may suspect combinations of components having a sexual significance. Children, too, often signify the genitals, since men and women are in the habit of fondly referring to their genital organs as little man, little woman, little thing. The little brother was correctly recognized by Steckel as the penis. To play with or to beat a little child is often the dreamer's representation of masturbation. The dream work represents castration by baldness, hair-cutting, the loss of teeth, and beheading. As an insurance against castration, the dream uses one of the common symbols of the penis in double or multiple form, and the appearance in a dream of a lizard, an animal whose tail, if pulled off, is regenerated by a new growth, has the same meaning. Most of these animals, which are utilized as genital symbols in mythology and folklore, play this part also in dreams. The fish, the snail, the cat, the mouse, on account of the hairiness of the genitals, but above all the snake, which is the most important symbol of the male member. Small animals and vermin are substitutes for little children, that is, undesired sisters or brothers. To be infected with vermin is often the equivalent for pregnancy. As a very recent symbol of the male organ, I may mention the airship, whose employment is justified by its relation to flying, and also occasionally by its form. Steckel has given a number of other symbols, not yet sufficiently verified, which he has illustrated by examples. The works of this author, and especially his book Die Sprache des Traumes, contain the richest collection of interpretations of symbols, some of which were ingeniously guessed, and were proved to be correct upon investigation, as, for example, in the section on the symbolism of death. The author's lack of critical reflection and its tendency to generalize at all costs make his interpretations doubtful or inapplicable, so that in making use of his works, caution is urgently advised. I shall therefore restrict myself to mentioning a few examples. The luggage of a traveler is the burden of sin by which one is oppressed, ibid. But a traveler's luggage often proves to be an unmistakable symbol of one's own genitals. To numbers, which frequently occur in dreams, Steckel has assigned a fixed symbolic meaning, but these interpretations seem neither sufficiently verified nor of universal validity, although in individual cases they can usually be recognized as plausible. We have, at all events, abundant confirmation that the figure 3 is a symbol of the male genitals. One of Steckel's generalizations refers to the double meaning of the genital symbols. Where is there a symbol, he asks, which, if any way permitted by the imagination, may not be used simultaneously in the masculine and the feminine sense. To be sure, the clause in parentheses retracts much of the absolute character of this assertion, for this double meaning is not always permitted by the imagination. Still, I think it is not superfluous to state that, in my experience, this general statement of Stekel's requires elaboration. Besides those symbols which are just as frequently employed for the male as for the female genitals, there are others which preponderantly, or almost exclusively, designate one of the sexes, and there are yet others which, so far as we know, have only the male or only the female signification. To use long, stiff objects and weapons as symbols of the female genitals, or hollow objects, chests, boxes, etc., as symbols of the male genitals, is certainly not permitted by the imagination. It is true that the tendency of dreams and of the unconscious fantasy to employ the sexual symbols bisexually reveals an archaic trait, for in childhood the difference in the genitals is unknown, and the same genitals are attributed to both sexes. One may also be misled as regards the significance of a bisexual symbol if one forgets the fact that in some dreams a general reversal of sexes takes place, so that the male organ is represented by the female and vice versa. Such dreams express, for example, the wish of a woman to be a man. The genitals may even be represented in dreams by other parts of the body, the male member by the hand or the foot, the female genital orifice by the mouth, the ear, or even the eye. The secretions of the human body, mucus, tears, urine, semen, etc., may be used in dreams interchangeably. The statement of Stekel's, correct in the main, has suffered a justifiable critical restriction as the result of certain comments of R. Reitler's Internat Zeitschrift für Psychologie, 1913. The gist of the matter is the replacement of an important secretion, such as the semen, by an indifferent one. These very incomplete indications may suffice to stimulate others to make a more painstaking collection. I have attempted a much more detailed account of dream symbolism in my general introduction to psychoanalysis. In spite of all the differences between Schemer's conception of dream symbolism and the one developed here, I must still insist that Schemer should be recognized as the true discoverer of symbolism in dreams, and that the experience of psychoanalysis has brought his book, published in 1861, into posthumous repute. I shall now append a few instances of the use of such symbols, which will show how impossible it is to arrive at the interpretation of a dream if one excludes dream symbolism, but also how, in many cases, it is imperatively forced upon one. At the same time, I must expressly warn the investigator against overestimating the importance of symbols in the interpretation of dreams, restricting the work of dream translation to the translation of symbols, and neglecting the technique of utilizing the associations of the dreamer. The two techniques of dream interpretation must supplement one another, practically, however, as well as theoretically. Precedence is retained by the latter process, which assigns the final significance to the utterances of the dreamer, while the symbol translation which we undertake play an auxiliary part. The hat as the symbol of a man, or of the male genitals. A fragment from the dream of a young woman who suffered from agoraphobia as the result of her fear of temptation. From Nachtrage zur Traumdeutung in Zentralblatt für Psychoanalyse, 1 numbers 5 through 6, 1911. I am walking in the street in summer. I am wearing a straw hat of peculiar shape, the middle piece of which is bent upwards, while the side pieces hang downwards. Here the description hesitates, and in such a fashion that one hangs lower than the other. I am cheerful and in a confident mood, and as I pass a number of young officers, I think to myself, you can't do anything to me. As she could produce no associations to the hat, I said to her, the hat is really a male genital organ, with its raised middle piece and the two downward hanging side pieces. It is perhaps peculiar that her hat should be supposed to be a man, but after all one says, unter die Haube kommen, to get under the cap, when we mean to get married. I intentionally refrained from interpreting the details concerning the unequal dependence of the two side pieces, although the determination of just such details must point the way to the interpretation. I went on to say that if therefore she had a husband with such splendid genitals, she would not have to fear the officers. That is, she would have nothing to wish from them, for it was essentially her temptation fantasies which prevented her from going about unprotected and unaccompanied. This last explanation of her anxiety I had already been able to give her repeatedly on the basis of other material. It is quite remarkable how the dreamer behaved after this interpretation. She withdrew her description of the hat and would not admit that she had said that the two side pieces were hanging down. I was, however, too sure of what I had heard to allow myself to be misled, and so I insisted that she did say it. She was quiet for a while, and then found the courage to ask why it was that one of her husband's testicles was lower than the other, and whether it was the same with all men. With this, the peculiar detail of the hat was explained, and the whole interpretation was accepted by her. The hat symbol was familiar to me long before the patient related this dream. From other but less transparent cases, I believed that I might assume the hat could also stand for the female genitals. 2. The little one as the genital organ, being run over as a symbol of sexual intercourse. Another dream of the same agoraphobic patient. Her mother sends away her little daughter so that she has to go alone. She then drives with her mother to the railway station and sees her little one walking right along the track, so that she is bound to be run over. She hears the bones crack. At this she experiences a feeling of discomfort, but no real horror. She then looks through the carriage window to see whether the parts cannot be seen behind. Then she reproaches her mother for allowing the little one to go out alone. Analysis. It is not an easy matter to give here a complete interpretation of the dream. It forms part of a cycle of dreams, and can be fully understood only in connection with the rest, for it is not easy to obtain the material necessary to demonstrate the symbolism in a sufficiently isolated condition. The patient at first finds that the railway journey is to be interpreted historically as an allusion to a departure from a sanatorium for nervous diseases, with whose director she was, of course, in love. Her mother fetched her away, and before her departure, the physician came to the railway station and gave her a bunch of flowers. She felt uncomfortable because her mother witnessed this attention. Here the mother, therefore, appears as the disturber of her tender feelings, a role actually played by this strict woman during her daughter's girlhood. The next association referred to the sentence, "She then looks to see whether the parts cannot be seen behind." In the dream facade, one would naturally be compelled to think of the pieces of the little daughter who had been run over and crushed. The association, however, turns in quite a different direction. She recalls that she once saw her father in the bathroom, naked, from behind. She then begins to talk about sex differences and remarks that in the man the genitals can be seen from behind, but in the woman they cannot. In this connection, she now herself offers the interpretation that the little one is the genital organ, and her little one, she has a 4-year-old daughter, her own again. She reproaches her mother for wanting her to live as though she had no genitals, and recognizes this reproach in the introductory sentence of the dream. The mother sends her little one away so that she has to go alone. In her fantasy, going alone through the streets means having no man, no sexual relations, co-ire, to go together. And this she does not like. According to all her statements, she really suffered as a girl through her mother's jealousy, because her father showed a preference for her. The deeper interpretation of this dream depends upon another dream of the same night, in which the dreamer identifies herself with her brother. She was a tomboy, and was always being told that she should have been born a boy. This identification with the brother shows with especial clearness that the little one signifies the genital organ. The mother threatened him, her, with castration, which could only be understood as a punishment for playing with the genital parts, and the identification, therefore, shows that she herself had masturbated as a child, though she had retained only a memory of her brother's having done so. An early knowledge of the male genitals, which she lost later, must, according to the assertions of this second dream, have been acquired at this time. Moreover, the second dream points to the infantile sexual theory that girls originate from boys as a result of castration. After I had told her of this childhood belief, she at once confirmed it by an anecdote in which the boy asks the girl, "Was it cut off?" To which the girl replies, "No, it's always been like that." Consequently, the sending away of the little one, of the genital organ, in the first dream refers also to the threatened castration. Finally, she blames her mother for not having born her as a boy. That being run over symbolizes sexual intercourse would not be evident from this dream if we had not learned it from many other sources. 3. Representation of the genitals by buildings, stairs, and shafts. Dream of a young man inhibited by a father complex. He is taking a walk with his father in a place which is certainly the Prater, for one can see the rotunda, in front of which there is a small vestibule, to which there is attached a captive balloon. The balloon, however, seems rather limp. His father asks him what this is all for. He is surprised at it, but he explains it to his father. They come into a courtyard in which lies a large sheet of tin. His father wants to pull off a big piece of this, but at first looks round to see if anyone is watching. He tells his father that all he needs to do is to speak to the overseer, and then he can take as much as he wants to without any more ado. From this courtyard a flight of stairs leads down into a shaft, the walls of which are softly upholstered, rather like a leather armchair. At the end of this shaft there is a long platform, and then a new shaft begins. Analysis. This dreamer belonged to a type of patient which is not at all promising from a therapeutic point of view. Up to a certain point in the analysis, such patients offer no resistance whatever, but from that point onwards they prove to be almost inaccessible. This dream he analyzed almost independently. The rotunda, he said, is my genitals. The captive balloon in front is my penis, about whose flaccidity I have been worried. We must, however, interpret it in greater detail. The rotunda is the buttocks, constantly associated by the child with the genitals. The smaller structure in front is the scrotum. In the dream, his father asks him what this is all for. That is, he asks him about the purpose and arrangement of the genitals. It is quite evident that this state of affairs should be reversed, and that he ought to be the questioner. As such questioning on the part of the father never occurred in reality, we must conceive the dream thought as a wish, or perhaps take it conditionally as follows: if I had asked my father for sexual enlightenment. The continuation of this thought we shall presently find in another place. The courtyard in which the sheet of tin is spread out is not to be conceived symbolically in the first instance, but originates from his father's place of business. For reasons of discretion, I have inserted the tin for another material in which the father deals, without, however, changing anything in the verbal expression of the dream. The dreamer had entered his father's business and had taken a terrible dislike to the somewhat questionable practices upon which its profit mainly depended. Hence the continuation of the above dream thought, if I had asked him, would be, he would have deceived me just as he does his customers. For the pulling off, which serves to represent commercial dishonesty, the dreamer himself gives a second explanation, namely masturbation. This is not only quite familiar to us, see above, but agrees very well with the fact that the secrecy of masturbation is expressed by its opposite. One can do it quite openly. Thus it agrees entirely with our expectations that the autoerotic activity should be attributed to the father, just as it was the questioning in the first scene of the dream. The shaft he at once interprets as the vagina, by referring to the soft upholstering of the walls. That the action of coition in the vagina is described as a going down instead of in the usual way as a going up agrees with what I have found in other instances. The details, that at the end of the first shaft there is a long platform and then a new shaft, he himself explains biographically. He had for some time had sexual intercourse with women, but had given it up on account of inhibitions, and now hopes to be able to begin it again with the aid of treatment. The dream, however, becomes indistinct towards the end, and to the experienced interpreter it becomes evident that in the second scene of the dream the influence of another subject has already begun to assert itself, which is indicated by his father's business, his dishonest practices, and the vagina represented by the first shaft, so that one may assume a reference to his mother. 4. The male organ symbolized by persons and the female by a landscape. Dream of a woman of the lower class whose husband is a policeman, reported by B. Dalter. Then someone broke into the house and she anxiously called for a policeman, but he went peacefully with 2 tramps into a church, or chapel equals vagina, to which a great many steps led up, symbol of coitus. Behind the church there was a mountain, Mons Veneris, on top of which there was a dense forest, Crines pubis. The policeman was provided with a helmet, a gorget, and a cloak. Demons in cloaks and hoods are, according to the explanation of a specialist, of a phallic character. The 2 vagrants who went along with the policeman quite peaceably had sack-like aprons tied around their loins, the 2 halves of the scrotum. A road led from the church to the mountain. This road was overgrown on each side with grass and brushwood, which became thicker and thicker as it reached the top of the mountain, where it spread out into quite a forest. 5. Castration dreams of children. A boy 3 years and 5 months, for whom his father's return from military service is clearly inconvenient, wakes one morning in a disturbed and excited state and constantly repeats the question, "Why did Daddy carry his head on a plate? Last night Daddy carried his head on a plate." A student who is now suffering from a severe obsessional neurosis remembers that in his 6th year he repeatedly had the following dream. He goes to the barber to have his hair cut. Then a large woman with severe features comes up to him and cuts off his head. He recognizes the woman as his mother. 6. A modified staircase dream. To one of my patients, a sexual abstainer who was very ill, whose fantasy was fixated upon his mother, and who repeatedly dreamed of climbing stairs while accompanied by his mother, I once remarked that moderate masturbation would probably have been less harmful to him than his enforced abstinence. The influence of this remark provoked the following dream. His piano teacher reproaches him for neglecting his piano playing and for not practicing the etude of Moscheles and Clement's Gradus ad Parnassum. With reference to this, he remarked that Gradus, too, is a stairway, and that the piano itself is a stairway, as it has a scale. It may be said that there is no class of ideas which cannot be enlisted in the representation of sexual facts and wishes. 7. The sensation of reality and the representation of repetition. A man, now 35, relates a clearly remembered dream which he claims to have had when he was 4 years of age. The notary with whom his father's will was deposited, he had lost his father at the age of 3, brought 2 large emperor pears, of which he was given one to eat. The other lay on the windowsill of the living room. He woke with the conviction of the reality of what he had dreamt, and obstinately asked his mother to give him the second pear. It was, he said, still lying on the windowsill. His mother laughed at this. Analysis. The notary was a jovial old gentleman who, as he seems to remember, really sometimes brought pears with him. The windowsill was, as he saw it in the dream. Nothing else occurs to him in this connection, except perhaps that his mother was recently told except perhaps that his mother has recently told him a dream. She has 2 birds sitting on her head. She wonders when they will fly away, but they do not fly away, and one of them flies to her mouth and sucks at it. The dreamer's inability to furnish associations justifies the attempt to interpret it by the substitution of symbols. The 2 pears, pomme or poire, are the breasts of the mother who nursed him. The windowsill is the projection of the bosom, analogous to the balconies in the dream of houses. His sensation of reality after waking is justified, for his mother had actually suckled him for much longer than the customary term, and her breast was still available. The dream is to be translated, "Mother, show me the breast again, at which I once used to drink." The once is represented by eating one of the pear, again by the desire for the other. The temporal repetition of an act is habitually represented in dreams by the numerical multiplication of an object. It is naturally a very striking phenomenon that symbolism should already play a part in the dream of a child of 4, but this is the rule rather than the exception. One may say that the dreamer has command of symbolism from the very first. The early age at which people make use of symbolic representation, even apart from the dream life, may be shown by the following uninfluenced memory of a lady who is now 27. She is in her 4th year. The nursemaid is driving her with her brother, 11 months younger, and a cousin who is between the two in age, to the lavatory, so that they can do their little business there before going for their walk. As the oldest, she sits on the seat and the other two on chambers. She asks her female cousin, "Have you a purse too?" Walter has a little sausage. "I have a purse." The cousin answers, "Yes, I have a purse too." The nursemaid listens, laughing, and relates the conversation to the mother, whose reaction is a sharp reprimand. Here a dream may be inserted whose excellent symbolism permitted of interpretation with the assistance from the dreamer. End of section 31. Recording by Malone.